In this video, we explore one of the most controversial and mysterious claims in biblical history. Many stories and legends say that before Eve, Adam had another wife, a woman named Lilith, often described as a demonic being. But is there any truth to this claim? Was Lilith really Adam's first wife? Or is this story a later myth? Biblical scholar Dr. Michael Heiser explains where this idea comes from, what the Bible actually says, and asks, is Lilith ever mentioned in the Bible?
The Genesis story of Adam and Eve as the first human couple is pretty familiar in Western culture, even to those who've never ventured anywhere near a church or maybe haven't even ever read the Bible. So the characters of Genesis 2 through 4 are pretty unambiguous. We have Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. It's kind of shocking then when you come across ancient Jewish writings that give Adam another wife, specifically a woman named Lilith, or that depict the serpent as a woman temptress. Who is Lilith? Where in the world does this idea come from? Who made up that story? How did it sort of get inserted into Genesis by these Jewish writings? Well, let's take a look. Let's start our explanation with one example of a Jewish text that names Lilith as Adam's other Eve. The claim appears in the Chronicles of Jerahmeel, an 11th to 12th century AD Jewish text in section 23. It reads as follows: Know and understand that when Adam was separated for 130 years from Eve, he slept alone, and the first Eve, that is, Lilith, found him, and being charmed with his beauty, went and lay by his side. And there were begotten from her demons, spirits, and imps in thousands and myriads. And whomever they lighted upon, they injured and killed outright, until Methuselah appeared and besought the mercy of God." Unquote. Now what's going on here? The first Eve was a woman named Lilith who gave birth to demons? The short answer to the questions raised here is that early Jewish rabbis saw, or imagined, problems in the stories of Genesis and took it upon themselves to fix them. Several examples are pertinent to our topic. The earliest material involving insertion of an alternate wife for Adam in the Genesis stories is the Jewish Talmud.
In the Talmud, Lilith appears not as Adam's wife, but as a night demon. She is described as a dangerous spirit associated with seducing men and harming children. The Talmud does not say she was Adam's first wife. The idea of Lilith as Adam's original wife comes much later. In medieval texts like the Alphabet of Ben Sira, biblical scholar Dr. Michael Heiser emphasizes that this story is legend, not scripture.
It helps to know what the Talmud is, though. The Talmud is basically a commentary on something called the Mishnah. So, what's the Mishnah? Well, the Mishnah is an early 3rd century AD collection of religious regulations or laws and beliefs that are the foundation of what would become known as Rabbinic Judaism, which is a medieval thing. The Talmud is a commentary on those regulations and beliefs that some rabbis had, again, in late antiquity and the early Middle Ages on through the Middle Ages. So the Talmud is essentially a collection of rabbinic opinions and ideas. So what we have here in relation to our topic is a book of rabbinic ideas and speculations, one of which was the opinion that Adam had another wife. Now, this idea isn't in the Bible at all. It's just rabbinic commentary and speculation. Now, we could say just because the rabbis had a thought doesn't mean that the thought is true, and in this case certainly doesn't mean that the thought is biblical, or I would add, doesn't really mean that the idea even makes sense. It just tells us, in this case the Talmud, that at least one or two rabbis had this idea floating around in their heads. Not only is this a book of opinions, again referring to the Talmud, and speculation, but it originated over 1,000 years after the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, was written. That's a full millennium. The Mishnah is a 3rd century AD document. That's roughly the 200s AD. And again, that is a full millennium after Genesis had been composed and put together. At least that much. It could be more. I'm trying to be conservative here and go with sort of critical academic thoughts about when Genesis was written. If Moses wrote it, or at least part of it, it's more than a millennium later that we get the Talmud speculation. So consequently, when the Talmud speaks of Lilith in the Genesis stories, she is simply made up. She is a fabrication. She's an opinion of rabbis living over 1,000 years after Genesis was written. If you wrote something today and someone added a thought to it 1,000 years from now, would it be true? That's kind of absurd. Now, it's one thing to look at the Talmud and perhaps read some of its content and say, boy, there's just a lot of stuff in here that's made up. Well, that's what the Talmud is. It's a collection of rabbinic opinion and speculation. But it's an altogether different issue to ask, well, why would they do that? Why would rabbis just sort of make things up and then kind of insert them back into Genesis? Well, the short answer is they thought they were helping. Specifically, that doing this helped fill in gaps in biblical information they found curious or frustrating when they didn't get the sort of information they wanted. For instance, the rabbis thought that a second, earlier wife was needed in the Genesis story to explain the origin of evil in God's world. The reasoning went like this. Since Eve was deceived, and this is an assumption, she and Adam were in a perfect environment, Eden, some Jewish interpreters thought that human evil's origin could only be attributed to Cain's later murder of his brother, not the episode with the serpent. Again, what Cain was doing was actually intentional evil, whereas Eve had only been deceived. We read that earlier in the medieval text, the Chronicles of Jerahmeel. Supposedly, it was during this time that either Eve had sex with demons to produce more demons, or Adam did the same. And consequently, the rabbinic idea of the origin of demons and its resulting possibility that Adam had some other demonic wife besides Eve was based upon inserting those ideas into the biblical story to supposedly help explain the origin of evil in the wider Genesis episode. Now, popular internet sites, though, make the insertion of this alternative wife for Eve sound like it's coming from the Bible, like it's some hidden secret information in the biblical text. It's not. It's not a hidden secret. It's just an added speculation, and pretty much a flaky one at that. We still need to talk about one item. Where does the name Lilith come from? Well, according to several passages in the Talmud, there were 3 classes of demons. Some of them came from Adam, others came from Eve. And one of the classes of demons was called Lilin. Now, obviously, the term Lilin sounds a lot like Lilith or Lilith in Hebrew. This terminology, though, ultimately comes from Sumerian and Mesopotamian texts. The Hebrew word Lilith derives from Akkadian Lilitu, which in turn comes from Sumerian Lil. Sumerian Lil refers to stormy winds, and it's the same for the Akkadian terms, Lilu or Lilitu. Now, these terms were also various names for demons that controlled the winds. Demons are spirits that can come and go like the wind, or so, again, the reasoning went in these texts. Lilith, or Lilith, was one of those. This is also why Lilith is associated in biblical literature and later with the owl. The owl, of course, comes out at night, and we get windstorms, so on and so forth. Again, you put these ideas and concatenate them together. In Mesopotamian literature, Lilith, or Lilitu, was thought to be a demon that comes at night and takes the wind or the breath away from children, and something like sudden infant death syndrome. If this happened in a Mesopotamian context, the assumption was that Lilith, came at night and just really sucked the air, the oxygen, the breath out of the child, and that's why the child died. Lilith would also come at night to seduce men and kill them. So she got this reputation for being a baby slayer and also a demonic seductress of men. Now, these associations were picked up by the later rabbis and made into a demon lover for Adam, again, to explain the origin of more demons and the presence of evil in the Genesis stories. The rabbis took Lilith's history and put it in Genesis to solve what they thought was a problem.
I agree with Dr. Michael Heiser that Lilith is not a biblical figure and was never Adam's first wife. The book of Genesis clearly presents only Adam and Eve. The story of Lilith comes from much later rabbinic and medieval texts, not from scripture. These traditions reflect speculation and mythology rather than biblical teaching. Lilith belongs to legend, not the Bible. If you enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel.